We're in the middle of a series called The Five Love Languages, and we are, as the title indicates, focused on love. By way of introduction, a couple of things. Love is important. We each need a sense of love and affection. Each of us needs to believe that we belong and are wanted. Each of us, love is important. But love is also elusive. We leave our family and go into relationships, a marriage relationship, hoping to find in that the love that we once enjoyed or did not enjoy within a family, and find in some cases that love can be elusive. You hear couples saying things like, our love is gone, our relationship is dead. We used to feel close, but not now. We no longer enjoy being with each other. We don't meet each other's needs. Love is important. Love is elusive. As well, though, love is not an obsession. And the thing that makes it difficult is that relationships oftentimes begin with such hope. The beginning of a relationship is characterized by intense feelings of attraction towards one another. But what the research indicates is the kind of obsession that happens in the beginning of a relationship wears off in about 2 years. We might call it, or Gary Chapman calls it in his book, The Five Love Languages, that we're taking this series from. Good book, by the way. The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Library, available in any bookstore. Says, again, he finds research that the average time span is about 2 years. And then once the experience of falling in love has run its course, we return to the world of reality. And for a while, it seems like couples get lost in one another. And it's almost like they dwell together in an ocean of love. But then the waves of reality start to separate the couple. Individual desires, individual wants, individual aptitudes begin to make their presence felt, and the sense of connection that once existed and was so powerful begins to dissipate. Can be a very difficult experience. They're two individuals, and they fall out of love. At that point, two things can happen. There can be withdrawal and separation, divorce, setting off in search of a new in-love experience or a new obsession, or they begin the hard work of learning to love each other without the euphoria of the in-love obsession. I'm going to show a quote that I think is interesting. I showed it last week, but I think it's very interesting quote. In terms of love is not an obsession, Gary Chapman writes, our most basic emotional need is not to fall in love, but to be genuinely loved by another, to know a love that grows out of reason and choice, not instinct. I need to be loved by someone who chooses to love me, who sees in me something worth loving. That kind of love requires effort and discipline. It is the choice to expend energy in an effort to benefit the other person, knowing that if his or her life is enriched by your effort, you too will find a sense of satisfaction, the satisfaction of having genuinely loved another. It does not require the euphoria of the in-love experience. He writes, in fact, true love cannot begin until the in-love experience has run its course. That's a real strong statement. Look what that says. True love cannot begin until the in-love obsession experience has run its course. He goes on, we cannot take credit for the kind and generous things we do while under the influence of the obsession. And again, that's good news or bad news. If you're under the illusion that the kind of pizzazz, wow obsession that you might be experiencing now or hope to experience will last forever, then that's bad news. However, if you're a couple and you're wondering what happened to the magic, and you're wondering, boy, I wonder if we should separate or divorce, or I wonder if we should just seek some other relationship at this time. You're not in a bad place. You're in a place where true love can begin to happen. Because love is not only important and elusive, it's not only not an obsession, but love is a verb. And biblically, love is not something that you fall into and out of. It's not something that comes over us like an obsession. But biblically, love is something that we do. And Gary Chapman writes, there's 5 different ways that love are communicated, can be communicated. And he'll say that all of us have a different love language, which can be difficult as we go through this. We looked at words last week. This week we'll look at time. And then in upcoming weeks we'll look gifts and service and touch. And what he cites is that problems can begin where we're 2 separate people try really hard to do the best they can to express love for one another. He then finds words because words make sense to him. And when he gives words and they're not reciprocated, it can be hard. And what Gary Chapman writes is that we speak different languages. And it's like I speak to you in American and you answer me in Chinese and I can't understand that language. Some of us, our primary language is words. We love words. We love to be spurred on and built up. Others of us, words, they're nice. But we don't really feel loved until somebody spends time with us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Time. Time that loves. Time that loves, quality time. In the book, he talks about a couple that he was counseling, Bob and Betty Jo, that had fallen into a negative cycle in their relationship. He would do things he wanted to do, and she would try to get after him to do things that she wanted him to do, and went to Gary Chapman, who was a counselor, for advice. And he said the key is to start to affect the emotional climate of your relationship. And how do you do that? Express verbal appreciation for the things you like about the other person. For the moment, suspend your complaints about the things you don't like. So what he basically said, stop complaining and try to find something positive about the other person. He went on, twice a week, select one positive trait. Express verbal appreciation for it to the spouse. And then he had one other guideline. He said that if he gives her a compliment, she can't answer him right then. She has to wait for another time. And if she gives him one, the same thing. Encourage them to do that every week for 2 months, and if they found it helpful, they could continue. If the experience didn't help, they had kind of come to the end of their advice cycle, and he says, you can just do whatever you were going to do. They found it very helpful, especially Bob. The guy agreed that his language was words of affirmation. He's talked about how much words had meant to him as a boy, how good he felt when she expressed appreciation for the things he did. But she, although she was happy for the words, didn't feel the same level of, yeah, it's nice, but... And in discussing, her primary language was time. And for her, when he gave her his undivided attention, that's something that really communicated to her. And he explained to them what quality time is. It's not time spent together in front of a TV. It's not time spent together reading the paper and just looking over the paper. It's times of undivided attention where each gives full attention to the other one, and it's not like they have to be sitting at a table gazing into each other's eye, but just being together, doing something together can even work. But it's just something that the reason they're doing that thing is that they are doing it together. And when he explained that, the guy ended up saying, you know what, I do want her to be with me, and I want her to enjoy things with me, but I go and I work hard all day. And the reason why I do that is so that I can do the kind of things for her that she would like to do. And it hurt him that she resented it. But the fact is that she wanted the time more than some of the things that he was able to get with the money he got from spending so much time at work. Asked, what are some of the things she would like to do? And he knew those things, and he said, try one of those things every week or every other week. And things like meet her for lunch, maybe a weekend in the mountains, picnicking sometime, spend time playing games with the children, take a family vacation once a year. These are some of the things for her that meant everything. Time when they were just together, doing something together or with the family. Quality activities. And again, quality time and quality activities doesn't mean that we have to spend our time gazing into each other's eyes. The emphasis is not on what you're doing, but on why you're doing it. The purpose is to experience something together, to walk away from that activity with the feeling, he cares about me. He was willing to do something with me that I enjoy. And he did it with a positive attitude. This is love. And for some people, it's love's loudest language, the language of quality time. It is a language that God speaks. Look what it says in your worship folder from John chapter 14, verses 1 through 3. It's the last evening of Jesus' earthly existence, and he has said to them that he will be leaving. They're finally getting it into their heads that he will be departing from them. They have spent most of the last 3 years together. And the fact that Jesus is going to be leaving them is grievous to them, which tells us something. Jesus was good to spend time with. Not all of us have that impression of Jesus, that he wouldn't be someone you'd really want to hang around with, a little bit too holy, a little bit too kind of other. But these guys really loved him. And the fact that he was leaving grieved them. Again, that tells us something about them, doesn't it? Even more so, it tells us something about Jesus. Jesus was good to spend time with. Apparently, if you were with Jesus, you felt cared for. He looked at you. He spent time with you. In fact, that's what he did with the disciples. You know, if you've got 3 years to reach the world, you could make sense that you'd want to travel around and speak to a bunch of different people. But you know what Jesus did in reflecting what God wants? He spent intense time with 12 people. Poured his life into them, ate with them, sat with them, met with them, walked with them. Poured out his heart to them, listened to them. Had them listen to him. Why? Because relationships are important. And Jesus wanted to establish a relationship with them. Why? Because he was reflecting God. God wants to establish a relationship. That's why when Jesus said he was leaving, they were disturbed. And this is what he said to them. Look what he says. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me where I am. What he's talking about here are marriage customs of the day. If a man was going to marry a woman in those days, what would happen? That he would be escorted by his father and go to talk to the woman's father and the woman, and they would enter into an agreement. It's almost like a contract they would have to enter into, where the father and the son would give some type of dowry, pay some type of price, so that the son could have the wife in marriage. And once they cemented this proposal, the couple didn't stay together. In fact, the guy at that point would go away with his father to build on the family house. And the way they lived, it's much as the way China has lived in the past. They are changing now. But if you look at a Chinese village, there are buildings around a central courtyard. When we took kids on a trip, into the countryside where there was a farmer, and that's what it was like. There were houses, one-story houses around a common courtyard. And the father's house was here, and as the kids got married, they would occupy the other houses around this common courtyard. And what would happen then is that the son and the father would build on, and it's called an insula. They would build on to the insula. So more residences around this common courtyard. When Jesus talked about going to prepare a place for you, it's funny, in China, they would see that, or in the past would have seen that, as adding another room to the courtyard. We see it as what? A mansion on a hill. What does that say about us? It's not what it would have said to them. It would have been something shared around, a common courtyard. And what would happen once he built that thing, then they would go have the marriage, and the man would bring his bride to the house around the courtyard of the father, and she would become part of that family. Jesus uses this imagery. He is the one proposing marriage. And he's trying to get them to not be troubled. He says, listen, here's what's happening here. I'm going to establish an everlasting relationship with you. That's why I've come. I'm going to leave now. But I want you to understand that my leaving is really about me preparing a place around the courtyard, because you're going to live with me and my Father. and we're going to have a relationship, and you're going to share in a relationship with him, and I'm going to come back. And when I come back, that's like the marriage. And then I'm going to take you to be with me where I am. Where is he? Around that courtyard where the Father is. And you're going to spend eternity there. Yeah, eternity with Dad around the courtyard. Doing what? Doing what? Some of us think of that and they think, boy, what are we going to do? Eternity's a long time. What it says, Psalm 16:11, you have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. It doesn't say what we will do, but it does talk about what we will experience. And what we will experience is joy. I guess if there's a fountain in heaven, the thing that springs out of this fountain is joy. And you drink it in deep draughts. And the joy is not the kind of joy that we experience here. It's joy that never dissipates. Every joyful thing we do here has a season in which it's really joyful, but then the joy dissipates. And look what it says. With eternal pleasures at your right hand. You know something that we've never experienced yet? Eternal pleasure. Eternal pleasure is not something that we know. We know the passing pleasure of sin. Sin is pleasurable for a time, but then the rush wears off, the juice goes. We've not experienced what Jesus is speaking about, and I guess that's what it's going to be. I don't know what heaven's going to be like. I'm like you. But what the psalmist indicated, the thing that we're going to drink in heaven is joy, and it's going to be a joy that, I guess when we're there, the joy is not going to be any less after we're there 1,000 years or 10,000 years. You know what I guess it is? It's the joy Jesus experienced with the Father. Because that's really why he came. When they read about, why would he come and be a child? And I think it's really in order to be a window. Jesus was a window. And what he wanted us to see, through him talking about his relationship with the Father, he wanted us to see that there was something that we're going to share in. There is a relationship that we are going to enjoy that he obviously enjoyed. And he said he came so that we can share it. And so he came to be a window through which we could see at least a piece of what heaven's going to be like, and we can see it reflected in Jesus' eyes. He really liked what he had experienced with the Father. And he was really anxious to get back there. And he said, and I'm going to come and I'm going to bring you there too. You know what he said? You're really going to like it. You're really going to like it. A relationship with Jesus, with the Father. In fact, it's a doorway. He came to be a window and a doorway. So that through him we could have this experience. Time that loves, quality time and quality activities, gaining greater fluency. And again, we'll think of this with one another. How can we gain greater fluency in spending time with one another? So our time communicates love in a deeper, more meaningful way. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. We talked about words of affirmation. And words of affirmation are words, like we said, that build up and spur on. And when we talk about words of affirmation, we're focusing on what you're saying to one another. Don't say things to tear each other down. Say things to build each other up. And you'll find in doing that, the product long-term will be far greater. When we talk about quality time and conversation, we're not just talking about the things you say to one another, but what you draw out from your spouse. Listening is involved, and speaking as well. It's an illustration. I'll read. He was talking about a guy who came to him, and he began the conversation with, "What a fool!" And this is what he said. My wife would come home from work and tell me about the problems in her office. I would listen to her and then tell her what I thought she should do. I always gave her advice. I told her that she had to confront the problem. Problems don't go away. You have to talk with the people involved or your supervisor. You have to deal with the problems. Don't elbow them yet. The next day she would come home from work and tell me about the same problems. I would ask her if she did what I suggested she do the day before. She said no, so I'd repeat my advice. I told her that was the way to deal with the situation. She would come home the next day and tell me about the same problems. Again, I would ask her if she had done what I told her to do the day before. And she would shake her head and say no. After 3 or 4 nights of this, I would get angry. I would tell her not to expect any sympathy from me if she wasn't willing to take the advice I was giving her. She didn't have to live under that kind of stress and pressure. She could solve the problem if she would simply do what I told her. It hurt me to see her living under such stress because I knew she didn't have to. The next time she'd bring it up the problem, I would say, I don't want to hear about it. I've told you what you need to do. If you're not going to listen to my advice, I don't want to hear it. John Gray, in the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, suggests when a guy talks to another guy, he wants a solution. Guys talk to guys for solutions. I got this situation at work, and if I'm a guy, I'm talking to you, I'm expecting you to say, do this. And I go away, great. Now, what John Gray says is that not all of us share things in order to get solutions. Some of us share in order to connect. What he would indicate, women are more apt to do that. They don't want solutions. What John Gray says, the number one problem guys have is that we spout off solutions. Anyways, it goes on. He would say, I would withdraw and go about my business. Then he says, what a fool I was, he said. What a fool. Now I realize. She didn't want advice when she told me about her struggles at work. She wanted sympathy. She wanted me to listen. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to give her attention, to let her know that I could understand the hurt, the stress, the pressure. She wanted to know that I loved her and that I was with her. You know, guys, sometimes the best thing we can do, listen, bite your tongue. Just don't say it. Just listen. I remember one time where I just listened and I didn't say anything. My wife said, thanks. Well, for what? I didn't give you any advice. But it was helpful, listening. He goes on, she didn't want advice, she just wanted to know I was understood. But I never tried to understand. I was too busy giving advice. What a fool. And now, she's gone. Why can't you see these things when you're going through them, he asked. I was blind to what was going on. Only now do I understand how I failed her. For some of us, this is a word we need to hear. It's not always advice. And guys, if you're quick for advice and you sense that there's a word, learn from this guy. Listening. Listening tips, a couple things he suggests. Maintain eye contact with when your spouse is talking. These are simple, but maybe you'll grab 1 or 2 things from them. Don't listen to your spouse and do something at the same time. Turn the TV off. Put down the paper. Just do one thing at a time for a period of time, then go to do what else you wanted to do. Listen for feelings. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Observe body language. Refuse to interrupt. It says that we can listen for about 17 seconds, they say, before we have to say something. And 17 seconds, maybe we can stretch that out to 20 or 25 seconds without having to say something. So that's another thing you can work on. Extend that out to 17 to 18 seconds to 19 seconds and get a little bit better at listening before you have to say something. I see some head shaking. Gaining greater fluency, learn to listen and learn to talk. Quality conversation requires not only sympathetic listening, but revealing. When a wife says, I wish my husband would talk, because I never know what he's thinking or feeling, she's pleading for intimacy. She wants to feel close to her husband, but how can she feel close to someone she doesn't know? If her primary love language is quality time, Chapman says, and her dialect is quality conversation, her emotional love tank will never be filled until he tells her his thoughts and feelings. And self-revelation doesn't come very easily for some of us. And we come by that problem naturally, because it's how some of us were raised. Many of us grew up in homes where the expression of thoughts and feelings was not encouraged, but condemned. And so we're not real good at it because we never learned to be good at it. It wasn't taught to us. Request a toy was to receive a lecture on the sad state of family finances. And what do you end up learning? You go away feeling guilty for having the desire. And you learn not to express the desires in order not to get the lecture. When expressing anger, some of us experienced harsh, condemning words. What do you learn? If you're angry, never express it. You have to put a lid on it. So you don't express your desires. You don't express your feelings. Some of us may feel guilty for expressing disappointment, not being able to go to the store with the father. And we learn to hold our disappointments inside. And if you've never learned to share emotions and desires and disappointments, it makes sense, doesn't it, that you get into adulthood and not be real good at that. Not being real in touch with emotional selves. For some of us, sharing emotions is like learning a different language. You know what I did when I was learning Chinese? I'd have to carry around little cards with me. And I would take these cards out and I would look at them through the day. And I had to have cards so that I could refer to them. And this is what Gary Chapman says. Somebody take this for what it's worth. In terms of getting more in touch with feelings, I remember that skit Jim Lease did when he was out here. And I think one of the lines was, I hadn't had a feeling in 30 years, ain't hurting me none. And that's, but if you want to get past that, if you want to be able to speak this language, this is what he suggests. Write down your feelings in a notepad. Take a notepad with you. And what he says, couple times a day. Write your feelings in the notepad and a word or two to help you remember the event corresponding to the feeling. Do that exercise 3 times a day. You'll develop an awareness of your emotional nature. Then use your notepad. Communicate your emotions and the events briefly with your spouse as many days as possible. Some of us, what happened? Nothing. And really nothing. It's just, we can't remember anything. And therefore, if, that might be some of the thing with the notepad. Well, you know what happened? You don't have to be nutty about this. I was... yeah, I'm not going to be nutty. You put an event. The event, boss chewed me out. Feeling, I didn't like it. Boss chewed me out today. Didn't like it. That's getting better. For some of us, that would be, whoa, man, slow down. He talked about gaining greater fluency. 2 personality types. I want to read. He talks about the Dead Sea and babbling brooks. And there are 2 kind of personality types. With 2, you can see where this is going, can't you? Watch the elbow. Okay, here it is. 2 personality types in terms of talking. The first is, I call the Dead Sea, in the little nation of Israel, Chapman writes. The Sea of Galilee flows south by way of the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea goes nowhere. It receives, but it does not give. This personality type receives many experiences, emotions, and thoughts throughout the day. They have a large reservoir where they store that information, and they are perfectly happy not to talk. You say to a Dead Sea personality, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking tonight? He'll probably answer, nothing's wrong. What makes you think something's wrong? And that response is perfectly honest. He's content not to talk. He could drive from Chicago to Detroit and never say a word and be perfectly happy. On the other extreme is the babbling brook. For this personality, whatever enters into the eye gate or the ear gate comes out the mouth gate. And there are seldom 60 seconds between the 2. Whatever they see, whatever they hear, they tell. In fact, if no one is at home to talk to, they will call somebody else. Do you know what I saw? Do you know what I heard? Many times a Dead Sea marries a babbling brook. And that happens because when they're dating, it's a very attractive match. If you are a Dead Sea and you marry a babbling brook, you'll have a wonderful evening. You don't have to think, how will I get the conversation started tonight? How will I keep the conversation flowing? In fact, you don't have to think at all. All you have to do is nod your head and say, uh-huh. And she will fill up the whole evening, and you will go home saying, what a wonderful person. On the other hand, if you're a babbling brook and you marry a Dead Sea, you'll have an equally wonderful evening because Dead Seas are the world's best listeners. You will babble for 3 hours and he will listen intently to you, and you will go home saying, what a wonderful person. You attract each other. But 5 years after marriage, the babbling brook wakes up one morning and says, we've been married 5 years and I don't know him. The Dead Sea is saying, I know her too well. I wish she would stop the flow and give me a break. The good news is that Dead Seas can learn to talk, and babbling brooks can learn to listen. We are influenced by our personality, but not controlled by it. Gary Chapman writes, one way to learn new patterns is to establish a daily sharing time in which each of you will talk about 3 things that happen to you and how you feel about them. I call that the minimum daily requirement for a healthy marriage. If you start with the daily minimum, in a few weeks or months, you may find quality conversation flowing more freely between you. And interesting advice. When we apply love languages to God, it gets kind of tricky because we don't hear or see God. And end up what we do is we have to depend on somebody who, like me, gets up, or somebody else on the radio or TV, or your Sunday school teacher or someone you had. And a lot of people claim to speak for God. And you say, yeah, we have the Bible, and we do. But how much of a percentage of communication is nonverbal? Huge percentage of conversation is nonverbal. It's body language, feelings, it's intonation. You know, that's why email doesn't work sometimes. Because what is written out and scripted, devoid of body language, intonation, gestures, it just doesn't get across. And in a way, the Bible is like that. We have words on paper. And one person coming to a passage and another person coming to a passage can make it sound really different. Why? Because they are adding the sense of affect, emotion, intonation, gestures. And it really changes what you hear. Look what it says, an experience in John chapter 8 in your worship folder. Jesus, it says, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him. He sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. These men claimed to speak for God. And so when this woman grew up, she learned to see God reflected in the eyes of these individuals. And the eyes of these individuals communicated contempt. In fact, it was thought at that time there were 2 kinds of people that didn't have to apply for entrance into the kingdom of heaven because their applications would be flatly rejected. And that was prostitutes and tax collectors. And that would have been reflected in how they looked. And so when she looked to someone claiming to speak for God, what she got was ice and contempt and hate. And since these people claim to speak for God, you get the feeling, well, some of you know that feeling. You know the problem. Because someone claiming to speak for God, it happens to all of us. And for some of us, what we saw reflected in the eyes and face, the intonation of the person claiming to speak for God, we don't really like God all that much. I remember saying that in college. God, I don't like you very much. I know I'm supposed to love you, but I really don't like you. And I was basing that on my image of him, which I've come to see was false. Anyways, what ends up happening in this conversation, Jesus then bends down, let's read on, starts to write in the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir." I love this story. I guess I love it for a couple of reasons. I just see a couple of things here. The thing I love about Jesus is not when his eyes go soft, but when his eyes flash. And his eyes flashed here, and this woman saw it. These people whose eyes expressed contempt come to Jesus with obvious something or other, and Jesus looks at that individual and his eyes flash at them, and this woman sees that. And that's a gift that Jesus gave them. And, frankly, a gift he gives you. Because you saw the same look, some of you. And when you imagine God, you see God through the eyes of the person that looked at you. And I just want you to know is that if Jesus had walked into, and some of us had great upbringings. You know, we had great people that communicated wonderful things about God. Some of us didn't. And to that person miscommunicating, Jesus flashes. Because he said, "That's not my Father. That's not who he is. How can you be joyful and want to go to a place where he exists? It's not who he is." And so with Jesus, he flashed at them, and then he turns his focus back at her. And she wants to hear now. Wouldn't you expect it? I want you to imagine you're getting blown up by somebody claiming to speak for God. All of us know we do bad things. And so the thing you've done is getting paraded around in front of the faces of people who represent spiritual authority. And Jesus comes on the scene. And your face is down. Because what you did was real. This woman committed adultery. She did it. She did the act. Why? Maybe she was looking for love. She was looking for the obsession. We don't know why. But her face was down. Once you imagine that's you, it might not be adultery. We all do things. People who claim to speak for God are there. And your face is down. Jesus walks up. Can you picture this? You fill it in with the people in your life who have been in your life. And Jesus starts to say something. And he's not talking to you. He's talking to them. And his voice is angry. And you kind of look up, and because you thought it was going to be you. You're the one that did the thing wrong. They're the righteous ones. They apparently never do anything wrong. Or they never talk about it. And you expect him to call you on the carpet, and he's not. He's calling them on the carpet. And your eyes look up. And it's true. He's talking to them. And his eyes are flashing at them. And he's saying, anyone who's without sin, let him be the first to cast. And they're not casting a stone. And now he turns his face towards you. And what are you going to do? Are you going to look down now? Will you? No, not now. You look in his eyes, and here's what he says. "Neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." You know what you do is wrong. You know what Jesus offers here? Connection. Do you know he wants to connect with you? No, for real. For real. That's why he came. He has a connection with the Father that he wants to share. He wants to connect with you and connect you with the Father so that you can live eternally as part of his forever family. Why would he want that? Because of what he experienced. And he wants you to experience quality time, quality activities. It's not going to be boring. That's what he wants. And he wants to connect with you. And in the context of that connection, there's correction. And we've done this a bunch, but that's a real different issue. Does it make a difference? He looks at you. He knows what you're doing wrong. He knows the things that you do. And he says, "Come here. I want a relationship with you." And then with his arm around us, he says, "And by the way, you and I are going to deal with this thing inside. But we'll deal with it together. Are you perfect? Neither am I." But he wants to offer you connection. And in the context of that relationship, correction. That's what he tells this woman. I don't condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. Worship team, come on up. We have to hear the first in order to do the second. What would Jesus want to say to you? You know what he'd want to say? He really wants to spend time with you. He wants to introduce you into a joy. That's why he connects with you. He knows what you do. He knows you do things wrong like he knows I do. And he wants to connect with you in order to bring about correction in you. But the reason for the whole thing is that he has a joy that he wants to share with us eternally. Father, thanks for recording for us images where people are interacting with your Son, who is a mirror, a window, and a doorway through which we can both see you and understand what it's like to have a relationship with God, Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. To see you is to want to be with you. That's what we learn. It's to be sad when the sense of that relationship is going to come to a close. I want to thank you why Jesus came, so that relationships wouldn't have to come to a close, both with one another and with you. Eternal relationships, I can't even get my arms around that. But that's what you say it is, and that's what we were created for. We're not created for things that live and die. We're created for things that live and keep on living, for joy that keeps on flowing. I pray that you would give us the grace to be the people you want us to be here, understanding we have someone to care, somewhere to belong, and something to offer, so that we might be a part of doing what you want to do, which is connecting people with you eternally. Thank you for coming, Jesus, and for reflecting and enabling us to see the Father and know and have a way to be able to be connected with him by dying for us and opening up through your death a way that we can be eternally connected. In Jesus' name, amen.